Story number 1, The Mariner's Light. Ben only took the job at the old Oakhaven lighthouse because he needed the isolation. He was an IT consultant who craved silence, and the remote cliffside tower promised just that. The tower itself was sturdy, built in the late 1800s, but the living quarters felt heavy with damp history and a pervasive smell of brine that no amount of scrubbing could remove. The first strange event was the salt. Every morning, Ben would climb the 130 spiral steps to the lantern room to clean the Fresnel lens. And every morning, the interior glass of the lantern room was coated in a fine, sticky layer of white salt, like sea spray had somehow breached the thick, sealed glass. Outside, the sea was calm, 20 yards below the cliff edge. The second week, the sounds began. It started as heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoing on the metal staircase below his bedroom at exactly 3 a.m. Thud, thud, thud. They were too heavy to be rats, too deliberate to be the building settling. Ben checked the security footage. Nothing. Yet the sound was undeniable, always ascending, never descending. One night, driven by frustration, Ben waited in the cramped hallway near the stairs. When the clock struck 3, the air went icy and the familiar scent of brine intensified, mixed with stale pipe tobacco. He heard the footsteps start from the ground floor. They passed his landing, and as they went, a faint, dripping sound followed them. Ben peered up the dark spiral, clutching a heavy wrench. Just above him, he saw a wet footprint on the metal tread, a heavy, leather boot print, leaving a slick trail of water where no water should be. He followed the trail all the way to the top. The wet footprints led right up to the heavy door of the lantern room. He flung the door open. The room was empty, save for the massive lens. But the floor was soaked, and the Fresnel lens was dripping with salt water. As Ben stared horrified, he saw something in the glass. The reflection of the doorway behind him wasn't his reflection. It was a tall, dripping shadow of a man in an ancient naval coat. The face was gone, the eyes wide with panic. Ben spun around, but the doorway was empty. A second later, a horrific, crunching sound of breaking wood and steel echoed from the narrow exterior balcony outside, followed by the distant sound of a ship's horn and the spectral cry of a sinking man. Ben slammed the door, realizing the footsteps weren't a patrol. They were a ghostly reenactment of the mariner who had caused a wreck, forever reliving his final, fatal mistake at the top of the light. Story number 2, The Last Bell. Maria cleaned the south wing of the old Crestview Elementary for 15 years. She knew the building better than its principal. The south wing was scheduled for demolition, so she was the only one assigned to it now, tidying up the decades of forgotten lessons and broken chairs. The wing was quiet, except for one classroom, Room 104. Room 104 always had a specific anomaly. Every time Maria finished cleaning and setting the desk back in perfect, neat rows, one small, third-row desk would be pulled 6 inches away from a row, not overturned, not moved wildly, just shifted, as if a small child had stood up abruptly and forgot to push their chair back in. Maria started joking about the naughty little ghost to herself, moving the desk back into place every evening. Then the chalkboard incident happened. The chalkboard was freshly wiped clean at 7 p.m. At 11:30 p.m., when Maria returned for a final check, the board was covered in looping, clumsy cursive writing. It wasn't the chalky, professional writing of a teacher. It was a child's hand, spelling out lesson plans from the 1970s. Homework, Chapter 4, The Solar System. The hair on Maria's arm stood up. All the doors and windows were locked. The next night, the desk was moved again. Maria tried a test. She placed a heavy box of old textbooks on the seat of the robe desk. When she returned, the box was on the floor and the desk was 6 inches out of line. On the chalkboard, The handwriting was back, but now it was different. Frantic, scrawled and repeating the word, help. The worst night was when the crying started. It was a faint, high-pitched wail, like a child lost in a supermarket, emanating directly from the empty coat closet in room 104. Maria, normally unflappable, froze. She told herself it was the pipes, or perhaps an animal. As the cries grew louder, becoming a heartbreaking sob, Maria saw a small, perfectly round red ball roll out from under the closet door and stop exactly at her feet. It was a vintage rubber ball, the kind that smelled faintly of old gasoline. Terrified, Maria bolted, locking the door behind her. She never returned to room 104. The next morning, the janitor found her keys abandoned outside the wing. He checked room 104 and found the desk in the third row perfectly in place. But on the door, written at a child's height in dust on a chalk tray, was a single tiny sentence. The bell rang late. Story number 3, the depth signal. They called it the dead spot of Lake Connors. Not because anyone had died there, but because nothing, no fish, no weeds, no boaters, ever lingered over that 100-yard patch of unnaturally still water. Liam and Pete, armed with beer and a high-end sonar system, decided to find out why. The first anomaly was the depth. Connors was known to be a shallow, glacial lake, averaging 20 feet. When they steered their small aluminum boat over the dead spot, the sonar display immediately dropped to over 400 feet, which was geologically impossible. "Okay, that's a glitch," Pete muttered, tapping the screen. But the screen wasn't glitching. Below the 400-foot reading, the sonar showed a massive, geometric structure resting on the lake bed. It wasn't a wreck. Wrecks are jagged. This was a smooth, perfect square, roughly the size of a football field. It looked less like metal and more like carved black rock, but the lines were too precise, too manufactured, to be natural. As they drifted directly over the spot, the air changed. The gentle lapping of water against the hull ceased. There was absolute silence, save for a faint, persistent, low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate through the boat's aluminum floor and into their teeth. It felt artificial, like a distant, massive generator running perpetually. Liam dropped a heavy fishing line. With a sinker, it descended quickly, stopping abruptly when the line went slack at exactly 402 feet. They spent an hour trying to snag the structure, but the line always slipped off. That night, they slept on the boat, anchored near the shore. The hum from the dead spot was constant, a low bass note under the chirping of crickets. Liam woke up around 4 a.m. because the humming had changed pitch. It was now a higher, almost musical tone, a slow, repeating do-re-mi. He looked out. The dead spot was visible in the moonlight, but something was wrong. The surface of the water was rippling, not from the wind, but from below. The ripples weren't random circles. They were perfectly concentric squares, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the new tone. Driven by a terrible curiosity, Pete grabbed a deep water grabber and aimed for the light. They lowered it until the cable tightened. With immense effort, they pulled up a small, dark object. It wasn't rock or metal. It was a smooth, black piece of something that looked like petrified wood, but it was pulsing faintly with the same cyan light from the lake, and on its surface, a dozen tiny, perfectly formed metallic hexagons were somehow fused into the grain. The object gave off a chemical metallic smell. As they stared at it, the hum stopped, the square ripples vanished. The lake was silent again, but the silence was heavier now, full of a terrifying, watchful presence. They threw the object back into the lake, pulled anchor, and didn't stop rowing until the dead spot was a mile behind them. They never went back.